Sam Altman said, hey, we now have a contract. And that made everyone go, okay, that's the main villain now. I'm like tracing the whole Anthropic love-hate cycle, right? From them being the good guys who everybody flocked to from the Quit ChatGPT movement, to then running into issues with bandwidth and compute, and then launching 4.7. That was, I think, the first time they launched a major model that had this much backlash. It's nice to have a moral kind of reason to do something and have a goodwill of the people, but if you don't deliver the product, fundamentally, no amount of tailwind and goodwill is going to help you. Quit GPT or ChatGPT movement might as well have been called Quit AI movement, potentially, right? A lot of people are just frustrated with what AI stands for as a whole.
The younger generation is feeling a lot of pressure, and I totally feel for them. If you think that whatever you're going to school for is just going to be irrelevant, yeah, I could definitely understand where they're coming from. I think I named this live stream AI love-hate cycle. I probably should have named it like the Quit ChatGPT movement.
That's actually a good title, I think. When I wrote it to you, I was specifically focused on Anthropic because that's just what I'm writing about. But I think it's actually symptomatic of what we observe in general.
Yeah. So the Quit ChatGPT movement, what is that, Daniel?
The way to put me on the spot now, basically, it's a movement that apparently started actually, I think in late 2025 already, for a number of reasons, right? Some of them are like personality dislikes of Sam Altman and what OpenAI stands for. Some of it is about frustrations with performance and comparison. And then, of course, it was massively accelerated when the whole thing with Anthropic and the DOJ happened, where Anthropic basically said, listen, you cannot use our models for these specific purposes. The administration said, then in that case, you are a supply chain risk now and we want nothing to do with you. And then shortly afterwards, Sam Altman said, hey, we now have a contract. And now, obviously that made everyone go, okay, that's the main villain now, right? ChatGPT is not standing for ethically and moral right things. And then that was like late February, I think. And then immediately Anthropic became the number one app, or like the Claude became the number one app on the App Store. And that sparked that whole movement away, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how much you have talked about it or focused on it.
Not too much. Obviously, when it was happening, yeah, I was talking about it. The Pentagon and Anthropic and this and that. It's funny because like when it happened, I'm like, maybe I chose the wrong name. Maybe I should have had a different, or just use my name. Because that happened, and then I realized like everybody thought that I'm just like a ChatGPT guy, 100%, which is probably like 90%. So they're not entirely wrong. I think I'll just mention what I think about the Quit ChatGPT movement. I think it's like people get caught up in their ideologies with anything. And for some reason, everything is political now. I don't like the way that the world is moving in that direction. And now it's just AI because AI is the hot topic. So obviously, I'd like to talk to you about Opus 4.7, 4.8. Obviously, you're the Claude user in this chat. So what do you think? Because I've heard ever since 4.7, 4.7 was the first time I heard from a lot of people that they were unhappy with it.
Yeah.
What's your experience?
The reason I even brought this topic up to pitched it to you is because I'm writing about this very thing. I'm like tracing the whole Anthropic love-hate cycle, right? From them being the good guys who everybody flocked to from the Quit ChatGPT movement, to then running into issues with bandwidth and compute, and then launching 4.7. That was, I think, the first time they launched a major model that had this much backlash, because people were just almost unanimously unhappy, at least if you look at Reddit. Of course, it's not the most representative slice of population, but it's representative enough to show you a trend, right? Yeah. And then they also did a lot of like underhanded stuff, or that came off underhanded, where because of compute issues, they like turned down the default setting from high to medium, which means a lot of people who are used to working with these models immediately saw the quality degradation, and they didn't really announce it. Then somebody spotted that they have phased out mention of Claude Code on the Pro plan, which is like the minimum $20 top plan. And they claimed that it was just a test for a small percentage of users. But of course, the community took it, okay, see, they're just trying to cut away the small guys and go after the whales and push everybody into the max plans to deal with their own constraint on compute and so on. And then 4.8 was released just, a week-ish ago? Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a moment. I can see there is a question.
Yeah.
But then 4.8 was ostensibly supposed to fix a lot of the issues with 4.7, and there was supposed to be a more kind of honest model that is more token efficient. Yeah, because I think the 4.7 launch also coincided with the new tokenizer, and suddenly people were not able to get as much out of their Claude limits as they used to, myself included. Actually, there was a reason. It was one of the reasons I brought on ChatGPT Codex into my agent workspace, because I was simply running into limits too quickly with Claude at that point. So I just see this sentiment slowly shifting against Anthropic now. And I think what it tells me is that it's nice to have a moral kind of reason to do something and have a goodwill of the people. But if you don't deliver the product fundamentally, no amount of tailwind and goodwill is going to help you. So people are right now frustrated, not because Anthropic did anything politically triggering, to the best of my knowledge, but it's very much, okay, but you're not delivering the product that you promised and you're not living up to. So
Right.
in some sense, I think they became a victim of their own success, right? Because so many users clocked in, they weren't able to deal with the bandwidth that required. And then a few mediocre launches, and here we are. We are back into the hate cycle. Right now, we're getting to the hate Anthropic cycle. Not quite there yet, but I think that's representative. I don't know if that's how you observe it from where you're sitting as a bit of an outsider in terms of Claude Code. And
Yeah, it's interesting because like I don't use Claude. Obviously I've tried it, but some background information I have on the whole, starting at 4.7, from speaking to a cybersecurity expert, Chris from Toxec, TOXSEC, and he's definitely somewhat of an insider. So speaking to him, there's certain things he can say and can't say, but from what he mentioned to me, and people feel free to do your own research on this as well. Basically, from what I learned from him, 4.7 was basically nerfed on the cybersecurity end. And what happens is when you take a certain part of a model and make it worse on purpose in order to make it like safe for the public, it has downstream effects on the model in other ways,
spillovers.
spillovers. And I'm not sure about 4.8 what's happening. Obviously, it's brand new, so people still need to kind of.
Exactly. I think it's too early to really gauge the consensus. But again, cursory look at Reddit, you can see a lot of people are basically saying, listen, if 4.8 is an improvement, then I really hope that Anthropic doesn't make 4.6 obsolete, because for everybody, 4.6 is still the golden era of Claude Code and Claude in general. So a lot of people basically say, I'm not going to use 4.7 or 4.8 until they fix the issues. I'm going to 4.6. And if they take away my 4.6, I'm going to leave altogether, right? And then we saw that with GPT 4.0, right? As well, when people are saying that if you're going to force us to use GPT 5 or above and take away the legacy one, we're not going to stay, which I think also fed into the Quit ChatGPT movement at the time. Yeah, so back to the fact that, this is a cycle, right? People have their own darlings and things they like using. And when they feel the company is not living up to those standards or expectations, you have this pushback.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one more thing I will mention about it is I always wondered, why are they releasing these models so fast? And this is something that actually came from somebody who was in the chat on one of my previous streams, Farida Khalif. I'll mention it again from her. Like, she mentioned something to me that I hadn't really thought of, and it just makes complete total sense. Basically, the reason why they're releasing models so fast is to test them out in the public so that their frontier models that are private can become stronger. And some people probably have already heard that like they're going to release a Mythos class model, meaning it's not going to be Mythos from Project Glasswing. Some people are expecting something like that. It's not going to be that. It's going to be a Mythos class model, which basically means it's going to be like Mythos missing a few limbs.
Mythos Lite.
Mythos Lite is exactly the way that Sam Illingworth labeled it. Mythos Lite. So the interesting thing is, it's like I think that's probably the best reason that we could possibly think of that they're releasing models so quickly. Because I've always thought, and I've spoken to you about this before, like, guys, give it some time. You don't like if you don't release a model every month, people won't be upset that you didn't, especially with what's going on right now.
Yeah. I think there is also a market pressure, right? You want to be seen as the lab that's shipping and that's doing things and it's iterative progress. And so I think there is also a market pressure here involved. That's my guess. I think if all labs had the luxury of just sitting back and chilling and not maybe skipping a training run and going straight to the next model instead of constantly iteratively shipping, it would be, from a cost perspective, probably a better move. But you also want to be seen as an active participant in the market. And also, it's probably exacerbated by the fact that there are going to be IPOs for both OpenAI and Anthropic. At least they're gearing up for it. And then, of course, you want to be the one to say that we are the ones who have the highest benchmarks right now. And on paper, that's the thing. When you look at the benchmark that they choose to release for these models, each iteration on paper, on that benchmark, is performing better than the approximate. But unfortunately, there is now so much mismatch between the on paper benchmarks and people's real world experience that's what creates the noise and I think in the backlash.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. They should create like a Reddit benchmark.
yeah, there are actually many independent benchmarks that do put some of these oversaturated benchmark that the industry uses into question. Really like a YouTube channel called AI Explained. To me, it's one of the most high proportion of signal to noise channels because a lot of them are chasing like the next viral thing and everything is insane and everything's gonna everything. And every model is just a world shattering record. While this is a much more like measured channel. And the guy behind it, he has his own uncontaminated benchmark called Simple Bench, where he basically gives like multiple choice question answer pairs to these models. And on those ones, 4.6 from Anthropic is actually still higher scoring than 4.7 and 4.8. So there is something to it. Obviously, it's just one guy with just one benchmark. And then I saw a couple of others where on some arenas, 4.6 is still higher rated than 4.7 and 4.8. You can always cherry pick the benchmarks that make your model look good if you really want to, right?
Yeah. And with your own personal experience and now with all this, have you considered coming back to OpenAI?
Yeah, the thing is, I am doing it in parallel now. I'm not. It's not for me. It's not an either or choice anymore. I actually wrote an article a couple of weeks ago specifically about how to make your agentic work and your agentic workspace like platform agnostic. So you're never beholden to either Anthropic or OpenAI or whoever comes next. That you should be able to have your files and your knowledge base in order in such a way that if tomorrow you want to switch away completely from whatever exists out there and go to work for a completely unknown model, you should be able to do it with as little friction as possible. So I am still using Claude Code and Codex from OpenAI interchangeably. I would still say it's maybe 80-20, 80% Claude Code. And then when I run into limits or some other issues, I'll just switch to Codex to piggyback on what I'm doing. But I'm not beholden to either like one of the, I want to be able to test all of the frontier models just because by nature of my Substack, I have to. I can't really competently talk about stuff that I haven't tested myself. So I do use them, but I'm also steering to using 4.6 for now because of token limits. I'm only on a cheap pro plan. So 4.7 and 4.8 eat my tokens too quickly. And if I have any signal from the outside world that they're not doing quite as well or they're not a massive leap ahead of 4.6, then I just stick to what's the
Right.
proven and tested choice.
I think one of the interesting things about the whole love-hate cycle is that Google is just left out.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. I don't know if it's for better or for worse. I would say it's hard to even say because it's like the whole competition thing is also puts you in the spotlight as well. And Google's kind of in the background and they're so good. So they're just left out of the conversation for some reason.
I think there is also more of a meta cycle going on because we're talking about the industry like a kind of a pie that keeps going from one company to the other. But the truth is, there is also a major love hate relationship going on with AI as a whole. And I mean,
Right.
in our bubble, we are like, oh, AI is progressing. But I think from everything I pick up from around the world, in the US especially, I'm not in the US myself, but everything I hear is that there is a massive like public backlash or growing public, let's not call it massive, but growing public backlash against AI as a whole, as an industry, because of the Silicon Valley and what it stands for and all the impact it will have downstream and potential environmental impacts and societal impacts, and justifiably right. And all of that sometimes gets mixed into these movements because Quit GPT or ChatGPT movement might as well have been called Quit AI movement potentially, right? Because yes, they were like the representative of they stood in for AI in many people's minds, but a lot of people are just frustrated with what AI stands for as a whole. So
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
meta narrative here, right?
100%. I think especially with the younger generation, seeing that a lot now. I'm
Mm.
sure you've seen some of these videos at universities, graduation
Yeah,
ceremonies,
booing.
they're
Yeah.
booing AI.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I think a lot of it actually might stem from what we spoke about in the last stream, which is like the doomers. And I don't want to like hop off on a tangent too much onto that, but I think like the younger generation is feeling a lot of pressure and I totally feel for them. Like if you think that whatever you're going to school for is just going to be irrelevant, yeah, I could definitely understand where they're coming from. Maybe that's also why, in a way, like with the whole quit ChatGPT movement, like I think that's probably not even the right label. Like you mentioned, I think it's like an AI in general love hate
Mm.
cycle. And I think maybe like Sam Altman coming out and backtracking on the whole AI jobs apocalypse thing. Maybe that's a way of him saying, like, "Hey, we're the good guys. We're not trying to take your job." So,
Just trying to take your money. No,
yeah.
no, but yeah, I mean, I think really the Quit ChatGPT movement could really be called Quit whatever the current stand-in for AI is movement. And whether that becomes Anthropic, then there will be a Quit Anthropic movement, right? I think they are overlapping narratives. So you can't really quite cleanly separate them. And also,
About the
yeah,
question. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
also in terms of AI doomers, I mean, a lot of you're saying that AI doomers are the ones who tell people, oh, you don't have a job in the future. But the truth is, we're already seeing that like junior level entry jobs, which are notoriously, or at least historically, where people earn their stripes, right? You go into an office and you do some, let's say, not the most fun, boring, monotonous intern jobs, but that's where you learn. You learn from the experts, you work, interact with them, you get your foot in the door, and you work yourself out, whether it's in software, whether it's in legal. And increasingly, there are studies that show that AI, that's exactly the level of entry that AI wipes out. That like a lot of this, the junior work can be done by AI as long as it's done, it's supervised by a higher level. But the problem is if you don't train those future senior developers or senior legal counsel or whatever, because AI is doing it for you, what happens to your company down the line in 10 years, 20 years? And what happens to the juniors who haven't had the chance to train because they were replaced by AI to some extent?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. It's 100% a serious problem, and I really hope we don't go down that road. It's tough to say. We've spoken about it before. I think, um, from what I've heard, at least statistically, and I probably should actually get a reference for this. I heard that software engineering jobs are rising. So there's probably some numbers that people could go look that up.
Mhm.
But I think also in terms of the job loss, I think that's like a big tech issue that stems from 2020, low interest rates, COVID,
Mhm. Mhm.
overhiring, and now AI is an excuse to fire. And I think in general, from the people that I've spoken to in our little AI bubble, it's almost, and I'll mention like Andrea Chiarelli, who I spoke to. He made like such a good point, which is not too long ago, everybody was in our bubble, at least, everybody was looking to see how can I be more productive, and now everybody's so productive that they're almost thinking, how do I go back a little bit?
How do I get my life back?
How do I relax a little bit? Because
Yeah,
I can do so much and I'm doing so much,
yeah,
and I totally feel that way.
yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, I'm able to do so much more now, and I am doing so much more. I don't even remember what it was like before. So I think there's some truth to that as well. And
But I think I also recognize that because then what happens is before you could just say, listen, I've reached the limit of my constraints of what I can do and what my skill set allows me to do, and I'm content. I got the job done. But here you're always questioning, right? Should I be doing more? Should I be starting another Claude Code session and burning through those unused limits that I have for the week and just do something? Should I be building? And I have it on a pretty low burn level because I'm not building anything world changing. But I'm sure if you're sitting in your coding major projects, you always have that question in the background. Right? Should I be maxing, like token maxing or whatever the term currently is, right? So I think it's creating like a whole different new breed of anxiety in people, which is also not really well studied yet, I think.
that's so true. That's so true. I wanted to ask you about that medium setting question that Ready
Yes.
for English had.
Yeah, I was going to get to it because normally we do the questions at the time. But essentially, what it means is that for almost every model that you can run in Claude Code, and also I think on just regular Claude.ai, you can give it a setting of how much thinking it should be doing. So for simple tasks, you don't need a genius to tell you if the sky is blue or whatever, like something observable and easy and a quick answer about what you should eat for breakfast. But if you want a higher level task or a coding challenge that is like a multi-turn 2 hour job, you want to crank up this thinking mode for that model. And what that means is that it will spend more time going through the thinking iterations. It will burn more tokens, so it will hit your limits faster. It will take more time to give you an answer, but that answer should ideally be a more robust one, the one that considered more possibilities and works through more potential ifs and thens before giving you the answer. So it's like a quality versus speed versus cost tuner. And by default, I think right now, depending on which model you choose, you either have a high setting and then you can crank it up to max or ultra or whatever. And And at that time in March, what Anthropic did is that they set it from high to medium, and they haven't announced it. So, of course, I think regular users like myself probably wouldn't have noticed much of a difference. But if you're a power user and you're used to working with Claude Code for a specific thing, suddenly they started seeing it unable to refactor code in the same way. And then they found out later, oh, that's because it was actually thinking or using fewer tokens to think for less time.
Yeah, a couple more questions we can answer. I see there's also an extension to that question, but first, Dr. Linda Marie Noble, is it a reframing of what is learning in the context of AI? I think so. It's a pretty general question, but
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe it was referring to a specific thing you were saying. It's hard to like,
yeah,
if you can give
yeah,
us more context there, I'll be also happy to
yeah, for
or
sure.
something.
And ready for English, what algorithms will determine that difference?
I think again, this is my layman understanding. It's less about the algorithm. It's more that you allow the model to think for a longer time, because these reasoning models, what distinguishes them from the models we had before is that instead of just giving you a quick, instant answer, they go through a process where they question themselves and iterate and go, oh, maybe Daniel is asking this. Wait, can I be sure? Could he be asking these three other things? No, probably not. It's probably the first one. And they go in this loop. I'm oversimplifying, but that's basically what it does. And if you force it to answer immediately and say, don't go through this loop, it will just give you the first heuristically likely answer immediately. But if you tell it, no, it's okay, take 5 minutes to go through maybe not 3 iterations, but 10 possible answers and evaluate them all, and then come back to Daniel with an answer, then in general, on average, they will be more accurate on something that requires reasoning or math or logic or coding skills. And that's basically what that setting tweak, what you're tweaking. If you set it too low, it will answer fast and not think so much. If you set it to the highest possible level, it will probably spend maybe 10 minutes on the same question and give you an answer that is maybe marginally better, or should be at least statistically marginally better. I hope that kind of gives an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same across pretty much every model that you use, every
Right.
company.
You have ChatGPT, they have the instant versus thinking.
Yeah,
And then in thinking, you have standard and extended, right? So you have 3 levels now in chat:
right.
and regular standard thinking and then extended thinking.
Yeah, I think you also have research, which
Yeah,
I've
you also
tried.
have something called Pro if you're on the $200 plan. That's like the
Yep.
highest tier of thinking. But all you're really doing, again, if somebody knows this better, they're welcome to challenge me in the comments. But all you're really doing is just allowing the model to spend more time going through the same pattern of iterations and burning more tokens and dedicating more of those thinking processes to your question.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
not fundamentally different type of thinking. It's just you're telling it, don't hurry with the answer. Spend all the tokens you need to arrive at whatever is the best possible answer here.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think back to the topic at hand, though, in terms of this love-hate cycle, I think it's just like a human nature thing, honestly.
For sure.
Want to keep dragging it on too long if you don't need to, but like there's definitely a human nature here at play where I think there's two kind of main things, which is like how useful is the product, and then how much does it align with your ideologies? Because everybody has to pick a side nowadays. And I think the main turning point I really think was the Pentagon story, which we mentioned. And after that, there was the whole Quit ChatGPT movement. Just to sum up basically the conversation that we're having here. And then everybody went over to Claude. So many people were using Anthropic's models that I wasn't one of them, but from what I heard, like it was shutting down basically.
Yeah.
Like people couldn't even use it to the
Yeah.
extent, especially the users that were already there, which was frustrating for people. And now you see them teaming up with people like Elon Musk and the Colossus One data center, which they're taking from him, which is all another story. If
Mm.
you'd like to get into that.
Yeah, and to deal with the compute constraints that they have this deal now. But I feel like maybe to some extent the reputational damage has already been done. That's why even though they now have the compute to deal with things, although again they just had an outage yesterday, actually a bunch of outages. But now I think there is so much skepticism happening with around the models that I think they have a bit of a struggle now. That even if 4.9 or whatever comes next is going to be provably better, it will still take a while for the public to accept it. I think there will be initial pushback, almost like now they became the punching bag of, oh, you can't even release a good model anymore. And
Yeah.
like you said, but I think it's also, like you said, it's human nature that is potentially even outside of the AI the topic of AI. We just love a good David versus Goliath story, or the good guys, bad guys story, and good outrage. And then we don't sustain outrage for too long, right? Then you need some new source of outrage to be. I think that's
Yeah.
true for a lot of things that we do.
Yeah. With 4.9 probably coming out next week, it's going to be tough to
Yeah, at
stay
this
up on
point, it will be just like a new model every day just to try something.
Yeah. Yeah. Martin White says gives a new meaning to time is money. Spend more to get more AI time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's essentially what it is like, right? Because it is a compute intensive process to go through this. So that's how they chose to dial the knob.
Yeah. And there's here Dr. Linda Marie. The reframing question was in reference to the purpose of education, dilemma, and faced by students and teachers, jobs, and what curriculum. Like, what is
Yeah.
curriculum? Yeah. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah. No, for sure. I think, again, I'm not in the education space. I have kids who are learning, and I'm also once asking myself that question as a parent: what world are they going to grow up in, and what skills is useful? But I think because of the how rapid AI entered our lives, how rapidly it entered our lives, I don't think anyone has a good answer to what is the best way to incorporate it into our education institutions, because they're notoriously slow moving, right? In terms of, if you look at the pace of technology versus the pace of change in the education system, because there are so many other moving parts in terms of the legal frame in which the schools exist, and the policies, and the government involvement. You can't just be a wild cowboy and a maverick teacher who just says, "Hey, we're going to go all in on AI and this untested thing."
Yeah.
So I think they're raising a
Yeah.
lot of questions about what is learning, right, and how to incorporate it,
Yeah.
into it in a meaningful way, instead of just writing your high school paper for you, right?
Yeah. I recently heard some stats about education in general that ever since technology was introduced to education, that actually we're slightly worse off. Like apparently Gen Z is the first generation that's underperforming the previous generation in terms of education. And the interesting thing is that can you actually create like an actual causation between technology and lower levels of education, or is it just a causation versus correlation type of
Yeah.
situation? That was a lot
I
of
mean,
Asians. And
I think one person I like to follow in that space, and I'm pretty sure, Linda, you will know him, and that's Ethan Mollick. He is himself a Wharton professor, and he is he's the AI optimist side of things, and he's trying to wrestle with these questions of how do you introduce AI in a way that is actually supplementing your learning process and still teaches you critical thinking, instead of just AI as a crutch that lets you spit out a meaningless and now meaningless essay that used to maybe measure some critical thinking, and now AI can just spit it out for you and you can submit it in 5 minutes and get a passing grade. And how do we square that circle in education?
yeah, yeah. I will say before we just answer a few more questions, I personally think that not teaching AI in curriculum in general would be like not teaching kids how to use computers.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think fundamentally, the same, you could have said that a while back when Google first launched, and you said, "Oh, now you have access to information at your fingertips, right? And anything you need to ask, you can answer in 2 seconds with a simple Google search, because you have the wealth of the world knowledge into you. And then what's the point even of education when you can just get an answer immediately?" You could have said that decades ago, right? But I think the skills that have never faded during that time is, how do you approach a topic critically? How do you evaluate sources? Because yes, AI can spit out an answer, but how do you critically approach that answer and see and test it and find out and weigh it against other possible answers? Just like when you go on Google, how do you use your own judgment and taste to arrive at a solution to things? So I think critical thinking skills are not suddenly devalued just because you can put it on ultra thinking mode and it will spit out a likely correct answer. I don't think that goes away still.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just more building the incentives in the education system that actually encourage that, right?
I agree 100%. I think they need to make it fun. I think that would help. Like maybe have every student build not just projects, maybe have them build businesses and actually bring them out to the real world and have fun with it instead of being a regular like blue book type of education. A couple more questions here. Steve says, I wonder if DeepSeek or other open source models will become more popular in the long term because, as you said, the companies will need to pick a side. Probably.
Yeah. I think there's going to be I think I see it as a splintering of where you are in terms of expectation from AI. I think DeepSeek had its moment where, oh, they're so much cheaper and they have done what OpenAI didn't. And I think at some point DeepSeek was number one on the App Store. It was the same benchmark used to say that DeepSeek suddenly won. And the thing is, if you're using it for most everyday tasks, I think already now we're at a level where each iteration of a coding model that is marginally smarter for the average use case, none of us will feel the difference really. You don't need more compute power to answer like where you should go on your vacation or what party planning checklist you should have or whatever. So already now they're competent. If you wanted to go open source way, you probably could. But of course, there will be always a subset of power users, of people who are pushing these models to their absolute limits and who will always want to be at the absolute frontier because they're optimizing for the most minute changes in 1% increase in code accuracy or whatever it might be. And for them, they will always want to be at the frontier. And for them, I think open source will always be lagging behind because typically what we see is open source models are playing catch up at all stages. A given open source model now, today, is way better than a frontier model was like a year ago, but they're still those several months behind. So that's kind of double answer to that.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really good point here in the chat. So ChatGPT has 2 subscriptions, standard and business. It would be good to have a RAG educational subscription for students with low income. I think that you can even push that further and say like the universities should pay for a mass subscription for all their students and spend some of that money that they're getting from tuition to allow all students to have access to AI.
But also, I'm just trying to open the link here so I can drop it because this is actually here. They have some variation of this. They have a ChatGPT for teachers and it's a freely available. And then I believe they also have a sponsorship of some sort where like all students of a certain, I'm not sure if it's everywhere in the US. I can't find it right off the top of my head, but they did do like a 1-year paid subscription to ChatGPT. And they also introduced something called ChatGPT Go, which is like an ad sponsored, even lower than pro tier or plus tier of ChatGPT, specifically for low income countries to give people this access. But then, of course, you run into the issue of, okay, but in the absence of any education, maybe a chatbot is okay, but still, you probably need an education system in which these chatbots are deployed with the help of human instructors. And then we're back into the question of that, Linda, how does it enter the curriculum and how do we support the students so they're not just like self-educating through ChatGPT, which is probably not the best way to go.
Probably. Yeah, I appreciate you putting all the links in there, Daniel. I'm going to throw a link in here. That's the YouTube channel. A little self-promotion there. That's where we post the streams as well as streams about the creators. When we were talking about this topic, thanks for bringing up this topic, Daniel. I think it's a good one. We were saying like it's a good base for a conversation, but we didn't know exactly how we'd expand it out. But I think we've expanded it out pretty well here.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's really too much more to say unless you have anything else to mention on this, Daniel. I will just mention one last point, which is I think people should be just open-minded in general and not believe the hype. It's very easy to fall into the hype of the media and choose sides. I don't think that this is a matter of choosing sides. I think this is a matter of human nature.
No, I think so. Yeah, if you take the politics and the emotions out of it, there is also very sober approach to like how do we integrate this in a way that actually brings value to everybody, not like in terms of GDP growth, but also just genuine value to everyone and makes it meaningful instead of just being a crutch for people. I think it's what Martin White writes, education will need to actually teach critical thinking instead of just facts.
Yeah.
Actually, on that note, I have a really quick anecdote. I grew up, I'm from Ukraine originally. I was born and raised in Ukraine until I was 14. I moved to Denmark in 1996. And that was one thing that now, reflecting on it as an adult, I actually could spot between the system because I grew up in a Soviet education system where basically the teacher comes in, he or she gives you the right answer. Your job is to memorize it, to study it at the exam, to show up in front of the teacher and tell them that correct answer. And then you get your high grade and you go home. While in Denmark, I was met with something completely different where of course, you had some of that, but a lot of it was based on casework. Like, especially in the business school where I went to, you actually have to work with a company. You have to solve a real world problem for them. And a lot of it was based on group work, finding out how do you balance group dynamics and the fact that some people are carrying their own weight and not, as how do you negotiate and arrive at a consensus. And those skills, I think, to me, are obviously more valuable in the real world than being able to show up to an employer and say 3 + 3 is 6 or whatever, right? So And this is probably like a broader version of that. Do we just want the answers, or do we want to teach kids the ability to arrive at those answers and to think carefully through things? And that's probably the system we want to encourage, whether it's with AI or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Asking the right questions too, I think.
Yeah, that's a
Right.
good point.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we could wrap it up here. I sorry about the background noise. I have a jungle in my house. I have a 2-year-old and a baby.
I think you can be
So
excused.
yeah, I'm sorry guys. Thank you for subscribing, Ready for English. And yeah, again, hopefully Substack edits out the background noise later on when I download this video.
Just
I think
yeah,
I'll
just fix it in post.
yeah. So yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you to Daniel. Really
Thank you
appreciate you
all.
showing up to these weekly streams, man. It's always fun.
Always fun.
So yeah. Bye now,
All right.
everybody.
Take care, everyone.